Hello, Neil. Ah, the Louise is note taker. Joined the same time as you do.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, so one thing, well, note takers running. So looking at Steve Vitka, what he was putting in, one of the things that is coming up in looking at the digital travel profile is that if you're on vacation, uh, you know, uh, it's becoming very clear that what you want to do next. You plan so much of a vacation and some of it, so much of it's actually going to be ad hoc. It's like, I booked into a hotel. I'm in this town. Um, I'll figure out day to day exactly what I want to do, what walking tours I want to go on, what places I want to visit.
Yeah,
So it's pretty clear that what you want to do and what your long-term profile of what you want to do, what you need to do, and what you can't do. So, what's coming out of the model is what's your preferences, your constraints, and your requirements. So, requirements would be, I need wheelchair access to a restaurant, right?
mm,
Constraint is I have these allergies, right? Or preferences I like this versus that. But if you're on a trip, if you classic case, I really like chicken. So if you don't say, okay, I need to mix up the variety of that while I'm on vacation. So, if I'm looking for tonight's restaurant and I've been out for, 4 or 5 days in a row, somebody needs to look at your history and interpret your preferences in a manner that is consistent with giving you requisite variety as opposed to slavishly offering you the top preference that is sitting in your profile all the time. So it's very much continuous, shall we say, model update as you're
yeah,
going if you're asking. So
yeah.
so in terms, so it's not an LLM, but is it
It could be. Profiling can be very dynamic, right?
well, I think there's a difference between what you want in your long-term profile. In other words, things that carry across different trips. And shall we say, what I want to do in this trip, sort of like, uh, yeah, I like running, so I run 4 or 5 times a week. But when I say I want to do something physical, don't offer me running as the thing I want to do, 3 times a day.
Yeah.
So there's a different time horizon.
Well, not just different. The I guess the catch-all term is context. And
Hmm.
context is very complicated. So it's all conditional on the context, right? It's literally true too. As you know, the prediction is based on a conditional um, of the context. So in the naive implementation, this is the whole bunch of information you give before the outcome comes out.
Well, yeah. Well, the classic case that came out of what the travel industry says is I've got really at least three personalities. Me traveling on my own for pleasure, me traveling on business, and me traveling with a family or a group on leisure. So my preferences in those three circumstances. In other words, I don't have a static profile that applies. I may have things that apply all the time, like, I need a wheelchair. But there's other things that you're going to be dynamically composing um, what you want AI
Yeah.
to work from, right?
Yeah, for in the again, in terms of for ALM, this would be called context, and
Yes.
time can be a context. So all of this can be all lumped into a context, and that would be the actual default way of doing it. So there won't be any kind of a like so-called static profiling, or the profile would be the accumulation of all this.
Yeah, it's just the accumulation may be, the clock starts ticking on what I should consider.
Right,
There's like I
right.
said, there are certain
If-
things that are effectively persistent. Uh,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so
Hello, Stephen, and welcome, Haley.
Morning, Wayne.
We are a slow start, except the Louis note taker is always one of the first.
Gold Star.
Yeah.
Just saw a great demo and presentation from Realize on the ecosystem group. It's
Uh,
really very, very cool. Uh, it's all about facial recognition.
Facial recognition for what purpose?
Well, they don't keep your face. What's interesting, they just check the embeddings, and
Oh,
it was pretty cool. So you should watch the demo at least. I mean, it was interesting, and they're very much into collaborating with Trust over IP. They know first person project. They mentioned trust spanning protocol.
oh, very
Um,
nice.
yeah, so maybe a good in.
Very, very nice. All right, we should get started. Uh, this is a prelude to get longer. Let me see. There you go. All right. So let me also display the antitrust policy and trust of IP's IPR policy on the top. Um, for today's agenda, the there's a let me see, when is the Tuesday? So the past Tuesday, the LDT Belgium had a meetup. So I was invited to give them an introduction on the work here, TSP-enabled AI agent protocols, and there's a link and a video as well for that meeting. My co-presenter is Nicola Gaio, and he talks about authority is continuous. So this is a continuation of authorization in a way. I think it's related to you authorize an agent, which then authorize further down the string to other agents, etc., and how to prove continuity. Um, Not only that, but basically it's also a way to resolve. I think main goal is to resolve the issue of so-called confused deputy, which is a very um, one of the maybe the top challenges for authorization based on OAuth and the traditional web stack solutions. So that's definitely very relevant. So I would suggest we take a look at that. The second then is um, I had a just kind of code myself, so I did not do the update for the introduction and the rest of the draft. But I think I'm ready to at least, based on the feedback I received so far, um, and the two of the most well presented feedback, of course, is those two discussion threads. So we could cover those and maybe get to what we should be, at least put into the deliverables into the scope. A lot of these terminology discussions probably is very useful to simply clarify where our goals are and why we're putting this, going after this approach, right? So, so I think those are very, very valuable. And so those are the two ones I just put on. I thought we could make some progress. looks like we miss Steve here today, and but Sankshan had also a very good discussion on papers he recommended, which talks about these MD files, text files that give instructions to agents. So there are many of them, and so I list some of these ones. And the two papers Sanction recommended argues the pros and cons of this phenomenon and what does it mean, and maybe I thought it's very much related to our discussion on the so-called informal data as well. So these are non-verifiable data, but um, it is part of the contest for agents. So it's very much relevant. Those are the two topics I listed, and I think it will help us move this forward. Hopefully next week we should have some set of definitions, terminology. I think we are getting into, and also the threat model, what kind of problems we were trying to solve. There, that's the quick agenda. Does that sound good for today?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm hoping that we should be able to make some. We don't have to like have a final conclusion of some kind because terminology discussion tend to go on forever. But we should have a working thing we could push forward. So that's hopeful. All right, so let me back up on news to share. I think we have a new no new attendees today. The news side. So I found finally the link, the GitHub link for the the first person project from that. This is contributed by Affinity. Open VTC is a verifiable trust community, I think. So think of it as a group. So this is the, constructing of the graph, the trust graph and stuff like that. And I haven't played with it yet. I saw the demo, very impressive. So here's the link, and feel free to explore that further. And the only other news I thought very interesting is Anthropic versus Pentagon, and it's in the news all over the place. And I thought it's very illuminating in terms of like people, if people worry about a lot of governance and how this long run will be governed, etc. Um, anyway, I thought it will pop up. Maybe you guys have comments or opinions on that.
Well, I have seen certainly an amount of traffic saying the number of people defecting from OpenAI to Anthropic is enormous.
Okay.
Like OpenAI lost like in one day 1.5 million users.
Wow. So there are people who are paying close attention to this, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I read somewhere that they have this business benchmark, the recurring active recurring revenue, ARR, I guess. Looks like Anthropic is catching up to OpenAI, or they are about the same now in by the measure of ARR. Um, and the fact that most of the programmers think um, um, the coding side, Anthropic is doing better, also is helpful. So the heavy users or people who actually do use AI for work lean towards Anthropic too. Any other comments or any other news want to get into? Yeah, too much on all of this. Okay, so but if whenever you have more to share, feel free, and I would take maybe 5 minutes. I don't need a lot of time, just to show the LVDT's Belgium meetup. Um, it's supposed to be in person, but this time both, well, at least me, are not there. So this is a online one, and I will just quickly click through the slides that I was preparing for. I did not do a lot of work, but um, I was just recovering from the cold. Um, but started usually with sort of some moments, and we covered the open cloud related issues. It's a very interesting way of thinking, both on in terms of like the negative or criticisms, what it is missing, but also the positive or the illuminating side of this, right? It's showing like, hey, you could build a more personalized agent or agent kind of application, and there is a relatively easy way to do this. And this is also very interesting. The second episode is about all the SaaS software, what happened to the SaaS software. Um, and very specifically, it's um, if you haven't been paying close attention, the it's very much related to Anthropic again, because in I don't know. This happening so fast, I can't remember, but it's roughly a week, maybe maximum 2 weeks ago. Anthropic was giving out these skill files, or the MD files, and one of them do legal reviews for contracts. One of them do do Word documents or slide deck, etc. Right? So each one of them very simple, just a few instructions in plain English on how to do this. And boom, so this is this new skill, new feature, or new software being released. So that created a panic, and the panic then spread, and apparently there's depending on which hype you read into, up to $1 trillion or as little as 300 billion being wiped out from software. And it looks like every software company would have to now answer this question. How you going to survive from another episode of this very soon. And so this is to me very illuminating and interesting episode to follow. And then the last one we just talk about Anthropic and so-called supply chain risk. So this is also very interesting. The rest of it is so I'm going to just show you two diagrams and things, and then we can move on to the next topic. So uh, I'm trying to simplify like the way looking at these issues and how do we actually put our effort into different categories, right? So that we're not constantly sort of mixing all them together. And I came up with this three legs to analogy. One is about a guardrail. And I would put all the digital trust, credentials, authorization we're talking about, all in terms of guardrails. So these are um, scaffoldings and guardrails, and then external rules, for example, that we can impose on, or we trying to impose on, or at least what's the right way to encourage or recommend, right? Something like that. Okay. Alignment is to training the models so that the model are willing to follow it. So it's more of a intent, I would say. So that would be um, that's generally the term alignment is to think about how do we do um, training, post-training, or other things, like, for example, giving a um, agent.md file with a lot of guidelines written to sort of influence the because whatever you put in there is a prior or a context, and the agent's behavior are conditioned on those. And therefore, by putting the right file there with the right language, um, you will have certain amount of influence. And apparently, you can write, for example, poetry. You make the language in certain way, you will have stronger influence. That is actually true. So those are all related to alignment. And that's very different from guardrail when we say, oh, you must, verify this cryptographic algorithm of some kind, something like that. So very different nature. And finally, we talk about governance, but then in these terms, the governance will be then expressed in a higher layer thing. If you have guardrails, you can say, well, I want to all my, agent, if the agent is going to take an action, the agent must prove to me that it has the proper authorization, for example. That would be a governance rule that we can express in some way or impose in some way. So that give me some terminology to use. Maybe we'll put this into our document as well. And then that way we can then say, oh, okay, I'm now focused on the guardrail portion. That way we don't always trying to cover everything because that would be very exhausting and sometimes confusing. So separate them, and we know they are related to each other in many, many ways. But this terminology allow me to focus on one problem for the moment while we dive deeper. Um, and so that give me the uh, a, a way to talk about this, and this is the maybe come down to the definition of what is an agent. So a software engineer's view of a definition would be something like this. I have a piece of software. I would say that is, the agent or the controller. Some people say OS. It then can use a LM for um, any kind of intelligent decision making. And then some memory and context and etc. So these are um, data. They are uh, being that can be used as a part of the context for the agent. And then finally, the agent can use tools. So the tool can be open-ended, it can be any kind of tools, anything from fully digital websites, social media, databases, right, search engines, emails to um, API calls so that you can reach out and operate the stuff. to things like get human help, right? Render human, that kind of also. So all of these are basically tools that we can connect to really, and then the agent may talk to other agent to coordinate, and so that is a one way of look at like, oh, what is an agent? Well, I guess this picture describes something like an agent. I don't know how comprehensive we need to be, but basically this would be sufficient in a lot of ways for our specification. And then this specification would cover what does it mean to be a TSP-enabled agent, and so the TSP-enabled agent will produce, the wallet and verifiable identifiers, and two, various places that when you have communication, you have the gaps we were talking about in the introduction, and then how TSP will solve those gaps with the integration on those areas. So this covers, I think, um, one way we can cover the spec where we need to address, and then there will be definitely a set of terminology we need to in some way define. um, yeah, so this hopefully give you in your mind some outline, like, hey, this look like how we would do it, and naturally this can be fully implemented and demoed as well, etc. Okay. Um, yeah, that's it. And then one of the maybe without taking too much time, one of the good example would be like people have open claw. We could have a T claw, for example. This is will be a right. I don't know a TSP enabled, and here's how it will look like. And same functionality, hopefully, probably even better because we have a lot of things that the old open claw couldn't do, and now this new thing can do it. And yeah, so that give us I think a context to think about, maybe come down to something more tangible as well. So that's all I have. And the full presentation and sorry, and Nicola's part of the presentation is in the video. Um, Nicola has also a link talking about the different kind of authorization scheme, which is very relevant to us, which is, this is also nice too, because if we want to get into, let me see, this picture here. Oh, I didn't put a human here, but a human is a user of this agent. You're talking to it and it's going to, delegate, for instance, on a user tool to maybe a API, for example. The API will challenge the agent, say, who are you, right? And the agent say, well, I'm agent X, acting on behalf of Neil, right? And so that would be the use case will come down to about authorization and delegated authorization. And then if you then you want to chain it to another agent, which then go to this, um, and I think that continuity or how that delegation can be chained step by step, eventually reach, and you can prove the whole process is very important as well. So that is how the topics very much related. I saw Maki, you have a hands up.
Yeah, actually, Wenjing, thank you for that. I think it's really an interesting proposition. So my question was with respect to how you envision this ambition, turning into a real world use case. So for instance, is it a web browser with, kind of an agent to agent chat system or communication system? So what's in your mind in terms of translating this into something that's really, I would say, digestible by a consumer, as well as, like scalable for, different purposes, including commercial enterprises?
Yeah, yeah. So there are multiple ways this can be used. And I'm showing two examples here. Because people realize that all of these links would be helped by some kind of protocol. Uh, Either standardized like MCP or A2A or being standardized, or you may use some proprietary way. And in our case, that's orthogonal to the our work. Um, so let's say you are building agent, let's say using MCP and A2A. Okay, and one way to adopt this particular architecture would be simply have TSP providing the transport for them, and so that you would maintain your application, but uh, rely on TSP for the trust infrastructure. Um, Naturally, that's not limited to these two protocols, and many people may even not even need to rely on any of the protocols. And so I've been, for instance, using simply tools as in like um, command line tools, or you don't necessarily really need to use MCP unless you have a so-called a mesh problem you want to solve. But other than that, you could essentially have an equivalent way of working it, build on top of a TSP as you wish. And so that is a alternative way to do this. Now, the consumers would actually never need to experience any of this directly. They wouldn't need to be aware of MCP or A2A or TSP for that matter, other than the IDs and wallets, and maybe like verifications, like eventually. If a human's making a decision, you'll probably want to be able to expose with those. And so those are the concepts that would be exposed to humans, or the user. But underneath of it, how your protocol actually work, how the two things are connected, all of that usually don't surface up. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah, it does. I think, because once we really start, stress testing this, I think a lot of scenarios might appear. Um, you know,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Naturally, because when we're building a final application, there will be a lot more issues, especially because the extent of the architecture eventually will stop somewhere, right? Like for example, we're using Twitter. We have no control of how Twitter works, so your interface ends right there, and you will have to bridge that boundary condition. And a lot of boundary conditions are difficult to do. Um, APIs and web interface, some of them I think are relatively well understood, but in the end, if we want to address, for example, a prompt injection or confused deputy, and threats like that, um, a lot of work is going to be at the boundary conditions, and that's where I think our end users experience is going to be. So you could build a messaging layer. We actually today we built quite a few of them already based on TSP, and so that's one thing available. And exactly what do you use really depend on it is up to the application developer to choose which one. Like that's what I'm saying. Like you don't necessarily need MCP or A2A. If that's too much, too complicated, you don't have to. And there's a lot simpler things we can do. And but I've been, sort of thinking because there's enough people who are interested in those protocols. we will probably specify. That's why we've downgraded, right, from um, talking about MCP as the top thing to as an example. So now our structure is that we talk about TSP-enabled AI agent architecture, and then as a two of the examples would be these two protocols. But they are not exclusive and they're not necessarily even recommended. It just says that you could keep if you want to keep using those protocols, you could.
Yeah, so I think whinging in that case, like let's say, TSP becomes one of the alternatives in the market. You have already big established players, like including, for example, Claude, MCP, and others. So what's, I would say, a key differentiator for us in terms of a TSP protocol versus what others can provide? Like if you were asked like one
Yeah.
key.
Yeah, maybe we could
Yeah.
for that maybe we could jump back to the second topic because if you let me see if I could quickly point this out to so the key differentiators may not be the whole thing, but I would say some of them are here because we are if you go to the introduction section, right? This is we talk about the gaps, the security gaps of So this is 1, 2, 3. We identify three things. The first one is agent identity, so that's a key differentiator. Today, agents are being used as because it's based on today's agents are based on ORs. So you use a token for authorization, and therefore um, there are a lot of issues. So one of them is that the agent does not have its own independent identity, and so that's gap number one we have identified here. And number two is about the authentication and authorization workflow. And again, here we have a lot of threats like confused deputy, prompt injection, etc. And so one of the differentiation, the second one would be that um, uh, these loopholes are better closed and allow um, the agent to have very dynamic and fine-grained scoping of authorization. So you can be more specific, like um, Neil was saying earlier, you have much more complex or dynamic context. We were talking about context. You say, okay, we were talking about ordering breakfast, I guess. That even though my long-term uh, um I like eggs, but maybe this morning I like chicken, something like that. Okay. So anyway, the this also require a very fine-grained dynamic authorization in order to pull that off. So this is the number two. And then number three, we talk about the data authenticity and the provenance. So this is to look at how information are given to LM, and because there are decisions essentially based on those input, and if you can compromise them, you would also compromise the overall decision making as well. And so that's gap number three. I guess we can turn this around and say those are differentiations as well. It's not probably the whole thing, but at least some big chunk of it.
Yeah, I think actually, gap number two like really addresses, the majority of the problem, I guess, compared to the first and
Yeah,
third.
yeah,
Because, like those, like I would say, agents can work on the, background without any notice sometimes. So I think the more you're able to really control this process and like be aware of the activities that could be performed, the types of delegations you would want to provide, that autonomy itself, I think if we can differentiate ourselves compared to other agentic systems, I think this will be the best part actually.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So the plan is basically we'll come up with some kind of scenario like we're discussing here. It may not be perfect, may be missing some very important aspects too, but rather than, sort of debating forever, we could move forward and outline this a particular solution we know quite well, practical. It solves some of the major issues, if not covering everything yet. And then we can always come back for another round to see if did we miss anything important, right? And that way we can make some progress. Um, yeah, um, so that's where it is, and I've received a bunch of feedback, and then I think one of the important ones that people want to see a threat model more explicitly kind of outlined. Um, and then we talk about the need for new trust layer. So this is basically this is hinting the approach, right? Because we are, our title say TSP enabled, so we have a particular approach already in mind. We do think that majority of its current work elsewhere uh, are based on evolution. So there will basically be improvements on the OAuth workflow, etc., to address some of these issues too. So our work will be a alternative way. So like, hey, if your application happen to be in this particular niche that you don't care about, um, you don't have legacy that you need to work with. You don't need to somehow satisfy your commercial requirement, etc. Then here's a new scheme will work a lot better, and that's what this specification is about. Then yeah, if we do this well, we should be able to really help a new class of sort of agents will show up, right? Like I was saying, you will now have let's go build a T-claw and how it look like and what is it better. I can think of a lot of things, but I'm sure others will figure out even better examples of it too. Um, uh, yeah, so that is um, let me see. So that covers hopefully most of the uh, introduction on the stage as well. We have 15 minutes. So I would maybe want to suggest we go to the this particular thread and take on um, Dakshan's recommendation. I've come down to the later portion of it. Yeah, I think this is the sometime last week on this thread in terms of what is an agent and make a minimum normative definition and then talk about capability, which we were just moments ago, and we talk about the thread. So it looks like we have a convergence on the approach, right? We can still debate, but we could basically use what I just mentioned as a minimum normative definition. And then we have, what are the capabilities? See, we have delegated authority over that also in there. And we have been talking about threat and security structure, etc. So it looks like I'm just wanting pointing out that it looks like we are on the right track. And we do that. It doesn't provide anyone a universal definition that is somehow true for agent. I doubt that's possible. But we have a workable use of terms that is not confusing and will allow us to actually make the spec complete. So that's my takeaway from um, um, this thread as well, and see if Neil, go ahead.
Yeah, Sankarshan and Tim Booma are both up on Substack, and they're having some back and forth discussions. And about 3 4 months ago, Tim Booma put a whole bunch of stuff. Said, why are we trying to reinvent the wheel? You go back even 2 and 3 thousand years, and humans have worked through a lot of these issues in terms of human to human. You know, what the lawyer allowed to do, and a lawyer delegates to somebody else in terms of what to do. What is the scope of actions for each party? What are they contracted to do? What do they do when they run into something that's beyond their mandate to come back, and who do they check with? In some cases, somebody who's been delegated comes back and checks with the lawyer. In some cases, the lawyer has instructions, says, okay, if this kind of thing comes up, you need to come back to me, the client, right? So to some extent, his argument, and I can't say he's wrong, is like we've got these systems. Rather than try and reinvent the wheel as a bunch of geeks, and I'm geek with a capital G. The legal profession has gone through this in spades, and we're perhaps that's and there's a couple of lawyer friends of mine who are in digital identity as well. So I'm going to throw this out and say, are we not just reinventing something of which there's already some checks and balances that are
Yeah,
history, right?
it's a great point and a very valid point as well. And if you recall, Neil and others earlier, we had a discussion along these lines. So one of the way of thinking about defining all this and is sort of a copy that into a digital domain. And clearly, in many of the industries, this is a great way to copy it, you know. So if we are thinking about in terms of like a digital psychiatrist or a doctor or a lawyer, um, but you will see this is the examples are always very heavily regulated and in areas, and so this is we are into these because within that domain, like if we talk about, talking to a lawyer, ask for legal advice, or to a psychiatrist, or to a doctor, going to a hospital, these are heavily regulated processes that we already live in that kind of environment, so we're used to it. AI agents can go to many different places that currently do not have such a structure. And if we are suggesting that we impose the same thing, well, that's basically suggesting that every life would be heavily regulated. That's very unrealistic. So yes,
Well,
those are great,
okay.
but they are not the whole world.
Okay, but there's a difference between having a single block of government regulation put in place, which would be impossible because it can't possibly regulate every possible action. And like I said, again, comes back to the lawyer case. I may have a lawyer act on, say, getting my house built for no other reason than he has the authority with a limited scope that's bound by a contract that's regulation, but for the specific actions you're asking it to do. In terms of, he may know nothing about construction other than he knows when someone he's subcontracted to say dig the foundations hasn't done their job, because he's not only going to hire the contractor to dig the foundation, he's going to hire an inspector to make sure it was done properly. Right. So now we're not trying to put government regulation. We're trying to say the basis of this is more, specific contracts for specific actions, which are how things work in many cases. In fact, if you look at, getting a house built, it already has a lot of that stuff in it.
Right. So now you're talking about contract, it's still contractual law. Again, I'm not saying those are wrong, I'm just saying they are incomplete. Contractual will come to play. So I think we talk about quite a bit on accountability. One type of accountability would be a contract. So you could basically say there is an enforcement scheme outside of this technical scheme, right? If something goes wrong, there are evidence to put a blame or put a cost to somebody, and that is contractual law, and that will be very useful. But still, I think it's still incomplete. Not everything we do we put a contract on. Or we are,
Yeah, but so let's take that model and extend it. Like I'm going to authorize you to, go and look for, a hotel room for me. And here's the constraints, right? So it could be broken down into, say, micro contracts, which are, extremely well scoped. So, there's no need to go to a lawyer to get a contract. I merely meant in terms of concept. There's a method of checks and balances, which also speaks to, in many cases, that, you have an auditor watching by looking at the logs coming out of the agents who have been delegated to say, are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? Which is
yeah,
the
so contractual law is extremely heavy-headed in the sense that I think your sentence captured perfectly. It requires somebody watching or enforcing or, taking somebody to some kind of arbitration process that has to exist outside of your own process. Right. So,
but most of that stuff never sees the light of day. It's merely the conditions which everybody agrees to operate under. So if something
yeah.
does go right,
So I keep coming back with another term called reputation, which you may think of a similar, but it's not contractual because you have no way to punish this particular entity other than say, well, I will downgrade you in my own reputation of you, something like that. But and that will be different from a contractual kind of thinking, which is you appeal to an outside system. A lot of time we can, so it's not practical to appeal to an outside system. We don't always go to, a contractual resolution or court to do that. Most of the things we do are small enough, we don't deal with it, or informal enough, we don't, go to a contract. We don't sign a contract. But enabling a contractual, if somebody want to develop a app, happen to be, finding contractors to go fix your house, for example, maybe, yeah, everything should be in the contract. And the accountability part would support that kind of application. The rest of it, then we'll come back to say something kind of a reputation rather than hardcore contract.
well, reputation is why I'm going to select a particular entity or agent to do a job, because it's got a track record of doing it and doing it successfully and having successful customers or satisfied customers, right?
Yeah. So one of the, think of it would be that if some contract didn't do a good job for me, I'm not going to sue them, but I would, record it and say this guy is not very reputable. And so I would less likely to go back to this person in the future. And that's also accountability.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, can't disagree.
Yeah.
It's just it's different strategies for different levels of depth of complexity.
It's exactly because we're talking about open-ended, agents and anything agent does, like I just want to point out that linking somehow raising the question, say, hey, we have a legal definition of all this already. That doesn't solve the problem entirely. It is helpful.
No,
but
I just meant it has a whole. I think Tim I think Tim stressed this in his discussions at World War III. Is not so much a literal contract with signatures. It was more, here's some patterns, all right? So they're usable patterns in
Yeah.
terms of being a third party.
So we
Particularly,
have a
right?
we have a terminology. It's called accountability. It's
Mhm.
essentially it's after the fact. If you want to trace, like for example, I think this is the word auditable, or I use the word accountability. It means after the fact, you can prove to a neutral third party that this event happened, or this cause and effect happened. And that's to the extent like our would the this particular spec would go to and say here is how you would achieve those, and that's part of the goal to have that accountability. And you can use that accountability to implement contrasts if people want to. You can also use that mechanism to implement reputation. But we would not go define based on contrast because that is beyond our scope and is also sort of a narrowing too much because we will exclude a lot of the other use cases out.
But the identity enables that kind of contracting if somebody has that system in place or wants to build that system, right? First, you need that identity to pin a contract or a reputation onto.
Exactly. Identity is
Uh,
the beginning. We need to have that long-term durable identity so you can pinpoint that too. Yes.
yeah, and identity plus credentials plus track record history, your reputation. So
Yeah. Once you have a long-term identity, then you can build some history along that using that identity, and therefore you will be able to accumulate some kind of history. And that history again can be used for audit and that sort of legal, accountability. It could also be used for more informal reputation or future decision making. So that all link tie back to the technical scheme that now we can say here this spec would cover will describe how you will go do about this, what is type of accountability can be achieved, and the algorithm to go with it, for example. Yeah, Slangashan uses role-bound agent. Um, so we don't have a term for role specifically, but we will have something for agent. A role, I guess, meant to say your duty. That is obligation, which is outside of the scheme because obligations are, who defines those roles, right? This is obligation is something you go when you do auditing, you say, I have a list of obligations. Did this agent actions meet those obligations? That will be a auditing function.
I keep coming back to the flight recorder.
Yeah.
And let's put it this way: it turns out, and I didn't know this until a couple of years ago, is that the train system across North
Yeah.
America also
Yeah.
has, and they've got recorders on. So if there's an accident, like one train collides with another, they've got all the all the trains that have been on the track. They've got recordings from all the switches and notification signals and everything else, and
Right, right.
it gets used pretty heavily.
Right. And if we could say if a train accident happened and we can go back, there are reliable information to pinpoint whose fault it is, what happened, that is what we want to achieve. That's the auditable or accountability mechanism. To discover the facts, the causal relationship between the agent's actions or humans' actions and what eventually the outcome of it. So again, any other comments on the general approach? And I'm sure we're going to revisit each of the more details soon enough. But if the general approach of a relatively simple and minimum definition set, then we go ahead, define our capabilities, like the gap analysis we just did, and then we're going to start to spell out what this TSP-enabled AI agent look like. And if those are imperfect, we'll come back, revisit in the future. How's everybody with
Sounds
that?
fine.
Yeah?
Yep.
And I think the one of the benefit of doing this is that in the end we'll have a T-claw to play with. So
It'll be fun.
that will be fun.
Yeah,
Yes.
cool. Yes.
All right. Anyone want to do a last minute comment about today's topic?
No, things are starting to converge. I'm seeing a lot of similar discussions going on, and so what's it take to have a sea of agents out there not running amok?
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure some of these concepts or things are going to be very um, common, and uh, but that's always the case. That's also point out to us that we need to hurry up, not hang on, some of the too philosophical questions for too long.
Yeah, it gets stale very quickly.
Exactly, exactly. All right. Well, thank you very much. We ran out of time.
Thanks, Wingjing.
And so
Thanks,
next week,
Jonathan.
hopefully, we will have a new draft to review. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great. See you guys.
See ya. See you, Mikey.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Did I miss anybody?